And there we go. So welcome everyone to this second webinar actually on resilience. Ourselves, the Risk Center, we are a multidisciplinary competence center of ETH Zurich. We foster risk and resilience-related research on education, and we serve as a bridge between academia and industry. For this series of webinars, we partner up with the Future Resilient System program of the Singapore-eth Center, who are the leading experts on resilience. Our speaker today, Alberto, is a senior researcher of the Future Resilient System and also working on high-density urban systems, and he is the cluster coordinator of a research group on the resilience of high-density urban system. His talk today, Managing the Worst to Achieve the Best, the Hidden Power of Robust Optimization. Alberto, the floor is yours. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Helen, for the kind introduction. And good morning or good afternoon to everyone. I don't know where you are. Here in Singapore, it's 6 p.m. So already from the title, I guess you have realized that this talk is about optimization. And I found a very nice way to summarize the topic that is a quote by Ray Dalio. If you don't know, Ray Dalio is from the Bridgewater Associates, one of the largest hedge funds. And his quote is this: plan for the worst case scenario to make it as good as possible. And this is exactly the main concept of this talk. But of course, this is just a general principle, so we need to put some more context. So I prepared this picture to explain to you more or less what you will see in a while. So imagine that you are running a system. It can be any kind of system, and where your objective is to maximize the performance of such system. It can be a business where you want to maximize the revenue, or it can be a transportation system. For example, imagine a bus system where you want to maximize the flow of people from a source to a destination. But now consider that there is an attacker, okay, who wants to disrupt this system. So basically an attacker with the objective that is exactly opposite yours. You want to maximize performance, attacker wants to minimize the performance by disrupting your system. So this that you can see here is usually defined as a bi-level problem, right? So when first is attacker that is destroying the system, and then the user needs to do the best he can to maximize the performance on this system after damage. But we can extend this concept even further. So imagine that there is a defender now who can protect the system before the attack takes place. So the sequence is, first a defender will fortify the system, then the attacker will destroy some of the components of the system, and then the user will do the best he can to maximize the performance. This is called tri-level problem. And I want to give you a little more details about these three main actors of this game. So the defender, the attacker, the user, before moving on. So the objective of the defender, as I said, is to fortify the system to mitigate the effect of the disruptions that can be performed later by the attacker. And usually in optimization, this decision is called here and now, because we need to do that before we know what the attacker will do. Then we have the attacker. Well, given the fortified system, what is the objective of this guy is to minimize the performance that can be achieved later by the user. And these in our framework represent the uncertainty because we don't know what the attacker can do. He has a lot of choices in terms of disruptions that he can perform. We don't know what he will do. But after the attacks is performed, then the user will look at the damaged system and he will do the best he can to maximize the performance. And this is usually called wait and see decision because it's something that happened after the attack takes place. Of course, this is just a general idea, so we need to put some assumption when we move from an abstract model to something more concrete. So let's start with the defender. We assume that the defender has got a budget that can be utilized to fortify the system, meaning to say he can spend some resources, money, whatever it is, to make it more expensive for the enemy to perform attacks. So for example, if you take back the situation I illustrated before, the bus or any kind of network when you have a source and a terminal, the defender may put some resources on the different links of the network. So then it will be more expensive for the attacker to destroy such links. then we already say that the defender needs to decide what to do before attacks take place. So it's a here and now decision. And there is also another assumption, that is the defender knows, is the last one, that the attacker is rational. So it will do the best it can to minimize the performance of the system. This is where robust optimization is used, because usually when you don't look at the worst case scenario, you can use stochastic optimization, you look at an average situation, but this is also important in case the system is very critical. Imagine, for example, a nuclear power plant. Of course, you want to look at the worst case scenario, right? Because otherwise the consequence may be severe, as someone said. What about the attacker? The attacker also got a budget. We define this budget gamma, and this is the budget he got to perform attacks on the fortified system, okay? And as we said, the attacker aims at minimizing the performance that the user can achieve after the attack. How to do that? By destroying some of the system components. So here I put 0, 1, meaning to say the decision of the attacker in this framework is binary. It will either decide to destroy a component of the system or not. Also, the attacker has some knowledge. He knows that the user will do the best he can to maximize the system performance after attack. So let's go to the last guy, the user. So we know already that his decision is a wait and see, so he will do something after attack. But also, this is a very important assumption to be able later to solve the problem. The problem of the user is linear, okay? So it's a linear programming problem. And you will see later why this assumption is very important. So for those of you who are waiting for some formula, some mathematics, something, this is how we can basically translate the description that I gave you so far into an equation, right? This is a tri-level formulation. What this is solving? Well, with this, we are looking for the best way to fortify the system so that after the worst case attack, the performance that here we define P is as good as possible. So basically is what Ray Dalio was telling us in the first slide. But let me go to the symbols that you see here to explain what they mean. Okay, so the first one is defender maximizing the performance, then there is the attacker who wants to minimize, and then the user who wants to maximize. Let's start with the defender. X here, the small x, is the fortification decision, okay? And this set, capital X, basically is a set representing all the feasible fortifications. For example, there can be a constraint saying, well, look, you can fortify if you don't exceed your budget. The second one, Z is the binary decision that is the attack, deciding yes or no, I destroy that system component. And this set, capital Z, it also includes a budget constraint. What is this C of XZ? Basically, this means, given the fortification X, C of XZ represents the cost for the attacker to perform attack Z on the fortified system, fortified by the decision X. And this attack cannot exceed the enemy budget. Remember, we call that gamma. So this means basically, look, this is the fortified system. You can attack, but you cannot spend more than gamma. That is your budget. And finally, we have the post-attack decision that, of course, depends on the previous decisions. It can depend on the fortification. It will definitely depend on the attack. Okay? Now, this tri-level model is not new. However, there are some challenges when you want to solve this problem. Number one is computationally, it may not be so easy to find the optimal equilibrium solution. The second one is that the user or the defender, they may not even want to find the equilibrium solution. For example, let's say that baseline scenario, you have some performance, the optimal one. Maybe after disruption, you are happy if you can get, I don't know, 70, 75, 80% of that. So they may have a target in mind that they want to fulfill. They may not even want to go to the equilibrium, the best. They may just want to fulfill some kind of constraint. And the third one that is really, really important, the budget of the attacker, gamma, is very unlikely to be known to the defender. But in this model, we assume we know what gamma is. if you imagine you are defending a system, how can you know what is the budget of the attacker? Is very unlikely to be public domain. So how can we solve these challenges? Well, this is the approach we propose. It's called REOPT. It means resilience optimization. If you see, it's very, very close to the previous one. What are the main differences here? Number one, the tri-level formulation is now a constraint of another problem. Okay, it's not the objective anymore. The objective is gamma. Now you may think, okay, wait a second. Gamma was the budget of the enemy. Why do we want to maximize that? Right? It seems a little counterintuitive. We want to make the life as hard as possible to the enemy. Why do we want to maximize his budget? Now, the reasoning behind this is the following. Here we are saying, find the maximum budget of the enemy such that in the worst case, we can guarantee a performance above a threshold. In other words, what this problem is doing is this. We want to make it as expensive as possible for the enemy to win the game, where winning the game means that he can perform an attack for which the performance is below pi, the threshold. So by maximizing gamma, we are basically pushing, like we are saying, if you want to win attacker, if you want to win the game, you need to spend as much as possible. I don't know how much is your budget, but I want to make it as expensive as possible for you to win. And this formulation solved the three challenges. Why? The second one, now we have a target. The budget is not known. We don't care. Now this is the objective function. And usually this problem is easier to solve because we can stop way before finding the equilibrium. Actually, we just need to find a solution that satisfies these constraints, and we can stop there. Okay? Now you may have some questions. Okay, number one is, okay, what can we do with this? Which kind of problem can we solve with REOPT? The second one is, what are the insights that can be gained from the analysis of the solution of REOPT? And then maybe, I don't know how many of you are interested in how to solve this problem in practice. So for those of you who are more into mathematics, algorithm, you need to wait later because first I will give you some answer for the first two questions. And before moving to that, one thing, why is this resilience optimization? Where is the resilience? For us in this model, resilience is gamma. Because usually when you look at resilience, you may think about the performance that you can achieve after disruption that somehow here is represented by pi. You may look at sometimes the area under the curve to quantify the resilience, but actually what is often missing is how many of such disruptions can your system tolerate. So here, the idea of this idea of resilience is actually making a system able to manage as many disruptions as possible. This is the idea more or less. Because if enemy budget is very large, it means it can perform more attacks. So I give you an example here. This is a simple max flow. For those of you who are not familiar with this model, we have a source and a terminal. We want to send goods, whatever it is, from the source to the terminal using these links. And you see two numbers here. So let's take S1, for example. The first number is the capacity. That means what is the maximum amount of goods that I can send through that link. The second number is a cost. And you can imagine that as the cost for the enemy to destroy this link. In other words, if the enemy wants to push the capacity of link S1 to 0, it needs to pay 3.5 million. So now, what is the scenario we want to address? Imagine that we, as defender, we have a fortification budget of 10 millions, okay? Then we can allocate that to the different lines of the system. Now, what does it mean? It means that if you take again, for example, the line S1, remember the cost was 3.5 million, and we decide to allocate 3 millions of this fortification budget there, now the cost for the enemy to destroy that line becomes 3.5 plus 3, so 6.5 million. So this is mathematically represented here with this constraint. The cost that was already there plus X, that is the fortification decision, times Z. Z is the decision of attacking or not. If Z is equal to 1, enemy wants to destroy the line. The sum of all these cannot exceed the budget of the enemy. So this is basically the cost constraint that I mentioned earlier. Now, imagine that we want to guarantee a flow pi of at least 6 units from source to terminal. What can we do by solving reopt? We are looking for the best way to allocate this $10 million to the different lines so that the budget required for the enemy to win the game, that means find an attack that can push this flow below 6, is as large as possible. And this is the solution. Maybe I move this a little here. So this was the original network. This is the 45 network. So you see that the 10 millions are allocated to these two lines, 4.2 millions to S3, and the remaining 5.8 to 3T. So now the cost here was 1.1 plus 4.2 is 5.3. And here we move from 3 to 8.8. With this fortification, the attacker, the optimal gamma, that means the optimal solution of our model is $8.7 million. Meaning to say, if the enemy budget is 0 to 8.7 million, we can guarantee that any attack enemy will do, we can always guarantee a flow of at least 6. If the budget is above this number, and here we have a tolerance that will be clear why we need that when we look at the algorithm. So let's say that the enemy got 8.8 or more, then yes, he can win the game. You see here, for example, with 8.8, he can destroy line 3T. So we can only send a flow of 3. Or he can destroy line S1 plus S3. But if he got 8.7 or less, he cannot do that. So this is a first insight. And very important, this is an optimal solution. It's not heuristic. Meaning to say, this is the best you can do with the 10 million fortification budget. You cannot find a solution with larger value of gamma star, given this tolerance. Okay, now I want to show you something quite interesting here. What I plot here, forget for now the two lines, but just focus on the meaning of X and Y. The X-axis is basically, you can think about it as the performance pi that we impose. So a value of 1 means that we want to guarantee the same performance that we got if no disruption happens. So it's really the maximum we can. And this is 0. We basically we don't want anything. It's very low performance, right? So when you move from left to right, you are requiring a larger performance threshold. And the Y-axis is basically the resilience, like this maximum budget that enemy needs to win the game. So of course you see something that you would expect when we ask for more performance, is easier and easier for the enemy to win the game. So when the performance is very large, well, the budget required to the enemy for winning is low. But now look at these two lines. What I plot here is two situations where the fortification budget we got is low or high, okay? And now there is something interesting. If you look at this from the perspective of the decision maker that is thinking, oh, should I invest more money in fortifying my system or not? You see that the benefit you get in terms of resilience when you add fortification is not the same. Like when the performance requirement is low or high, the benefit is lower than in this range. That is quite interesting. So we need to say the benefit of adding more fortification budget is larger when your performance level is in this range. So for example, if the defender is decides some kind of threshold for the performance, then he can decide also if it's worth or not putting more budget. So I thought that was quite an interesting insight. Then we perform some tests. So we generate random networks with random capacity, budget, everything was random. And then we tried 4 fortification strategies. Well, actually 3.5. The first one is baseline, so we don't fortify anything. The second one is very intuitive. We say, look, we assign the fortification budget proportionally to the capacity of the lines. Okay, so we just look at topology. Then benchmark D is the idea where we can basically remove one by one the different links of the network. We look at the reduction of performance and then we assign the capacity proportionally to that. Meaning to say, imagine that there is one line that when we remove it, there is a huge drop of performance. Probably we need to put a lot of fortification budget to that line. That's the idea. And then there is our approach. So I want to show you some results here. First thing is just focus on the black line for now. The black line is our reopt, okay? The y-axis represent the reduction, the performance reduction compared to pi. So remember in the previous example, we say we want to guarantee a flow of 6, right? If we have no reduction of flow, so we can guarantee 6 or more, then you have this 0 value. If let's say after attack your flow becomes 3, then you have a 50% reduction. And this is 100% reduction. Okay, so that's the meaning of the y-axis. What about the x-axis? Remember we found in the previous example, the optimal gamma, so the enemy budget required for winning the game, 8.7, right? So this is normalized. So when you see a value of 1 here, it means that is corresponding to that solution. Why we normalize? Because we generate random instances, so we need to put everything together. So in other words, if you look at the black line, if the enemy budget, that is this x-axis, is 0 to this value, right, that is the optimal solution, we know already that we can guarantee the performance without any reduction, right? When we exceed that, we don't know. Right? If enemy budget in the previous case is 8.8, 9, 10, we don't know how much the performance is affected. So what we did here, we test our method and the other 3, and then we try with an enemy budget that was up to 2 times what we can guarantee. So in the previous case, again, we got 8.7. This would be 2 times that. So what you can see here is that the black line, of course, is what we expected. Up to that value, we don't lose anything. With the others, we start to lose already something, okay? But what is interesting is this. When the enemy budget is above what we can guarantee, so in this range 1 to 2, where we have no idea what will happen, we are still doing better than the others, okay? And this, by the way, was a network with 10 nodes and around 30 edges, and the median time was around less than 5 seconds to solve these instances to optimality. And why I put median? Because there was so much variation with the different input that median is a more robust metric for that. But what happens when we increase the size of the network now is interesting. See that the difference is much more striking, okay? And when we go to larger, so this is 150 nodes, you can see that clearly the fortification that we find is much better than the others, okay? So it seems that this effect that we gain is amplified with the system size, and at the same time, yes, there is a drop, of course, but we are still doing better than the others, even in this range where we cannot guarantee anything. Okay, now for those of you who are waiting, how to solve this problem? It can be quite tedious to go to the details, so I just give you a quick idea. This is the model we want to solve, right? The reopt. The first point is we need to compute the dual of this inner problem. If you remember, one of the assumptions was that the inner maximization problem is linear, so we can compute the dual. That means in optimization, this can be translated into a minimization problem with the same optimal solution. Why is that important? Because then when we got a mean-mean, we can simplify to a single mean problem, and then we basically reduce the complexity of one level. Then when this is done, we need to solve the problem with a bisection search on gamma, okay? And we need to solve for each value of gamma in sequence a couple of problems. So the first one is looking for the most disruptive attack given the current fortification. And the next one is looking for the opposite, right? So it's looking for the best fortification given a set of attacks that we found so far. And there are 2 stopping criteria. Number 1 is we cannot find a fortification for the attacks. So it means that the value of gamma we are trying is too large. We need to decrease it. Or the other stopping condition, if the worst case attack we find with the current fortification is good enough, meaning to say the performance in the worst case is above the threshold, then we are happy with the current fortification. We can try larger gamma. Okay, so we go through these 3 steps a little more now in the next slides, but at the end I will show you the kind of pseudocode of the algorithm. Okay, duality, I say, right? So we have this inner max problem. We can convert it into a mean. So the max min max becomes max min min, and then it can be written like that, a max min, okay? So this is just to simplify by 1 level. Okay, you may be wondering, why don't you do it again and then the mean becomes a max? Because now z is an integer variable. We cannot do that anymore. So now there were 2 problems that we need to solve. Remember, the first one is, how can we find the best attack given the fortification? Well, the fortification is x, the value of gamma is fixed, and to find the best attack, so this is the problem from the attacker point of view, we call it attacker problem, we can solve this. It's a mixed integer linear programming because, again, the variable is binary, is z, and this is the problem we want to solve. What about the other? We want to find the best fortification given the current set of attacks. So all the attacks we found so far that needs to be managed because the corresponding performance will be below threshold, how can we find a fortification for them? Well, the idea is that for every one of these attacks, we have a constraint like that. This is, again, the cost constraint of before. So what we are looking here is basically a fortification that maximizes the cost for performing attacks. And this cost is T star. So it means that for the enemy, in order to perform any of these attacks, it needs to have this T star, at least budget. So how can we put everything together now in an algorithm? So the idea is this. We set a tolerance epsilon because we are running a bisection. We start with no fortification, but it can be a random fortification as well. Then we say, okay, let's solve the attacker problem. So let's find the best attack given the current fortification. Now, if the performance we find is good enough, so is above the threshold, it means that with the current fortification, the defender is happy because he can guarantee the performance he wants. So it means, okay, it's fine. We can try with a larger enemy budget. If not, it means that the current attack, Z star, needs to be dealt with by the fortification. So we have to solve the fortification problem. We are looking at the new fortification X star, and we find the T star. So the T star is the cost for these attacks, right? Now, if T star is below, less than or equal to gamma, it means that I cannot find a fortification for which all these attacks that I found so far are infeasible for the attacker. Because even if one of them is feasible, it means that attacker can push the performance below pi, so we lose. So if we cannot find this fortification for which all attack cost more than gamma, then the attacker wins the game. So what do we do in this case? We set a smaller gamma and we continue. Otherwise, if we can do that, so we found a good fortification, now we say, okay, this is my best fortification. Let's go back to the attacker. What is the best you can do with this fortification? And then the cycle continues. The attacker will come back. Okay, this is my best attack. Can you manage that? And then the fortification. We are looking for that fortification. Can we deal with that? Yes or no? So we keep iterating. And then we either stop here with the defender winning or the attacker winning. Of course, this is an exponential number of attacks because they are like binary, one for each arc, but it's finite. So we can guarantee in the worst case, eventually will converge to a solution. Then, of course, when we find the optimal gamma according to the tolerance we set with the bisection, we can return the solution. Okay, so what is the summary of all this? You have seen ReOpt, resilience optimization, a framework that is based on robust optimization. We can address this defender-attacker-user problem where the attacker is rational. And the objective we got here is to make it as expensive as possible for the attacker to win the game. There are some pros and a few cons of this framework. The first pro is the flexibility, because now the defender or the user can set their target, pi. okay, the performance target. The insights you get can be interesting. Like, remember that picture where I show you that in some range, when the performance was in the middle range, you gain more by adding more fortification budget. And this can help make better decisions. And also the needs. We don't need now to know the attacker budget. Why? Because it's the objective function. So we also fix that problem. What about the cons? Well, the algorithm, bisection is not really elegant. But actually, there is a way that I didn't present here, but there is a way to deal with that. So we can modify the algorithm so that it can find the solution without going to a bisection scheme. And then linearity, the inner problem must be linear. Why? For the duality. Maybe convexity can be another thing to look for, but the problem is that if we want to simplify by one level, we need to guarantee that the problem is linear. So it means that sometimes we need to simplify our problem a little. Now, you may be feeling that this is the last slide, maybe because, you know, you look at the first letter of this is F-I-N-A-L, final, but actually I have another one. This is the last one, references. So we have a paper published that is an application of this framework to a problem of power grid. So we are trying to fortify power grid. And then there is one in preparation. So all the examples and the picture that you have seen in this presentation are taken actually from the second one that we are working on. This is a collaboration with Professor Adam Ng from the National University of Singapore. Yeah, this is the last slide. So thank you for listening. I was very happy to have the opportunity to come here and present this work for you. And I hope that this will give you some more insights on how to use robust optimization and deal with problems of this nature. That's all.
Thanks a lot, Alberto. That was very interesting. So about the question, so people can raise their virtual hand or just speak as you wish. I can also monitor the chat if people prefer to write the question on the chat. So it's really the way you prefer. So if anyone has a question, Paul, go ahead.
Yes. Well, thanks, Alberto. It was a brilliant talk. I'm also glad that you work together with Melvin Singh at NUS. So please give him my very best regards.
Okay, I will.
A question, 2 points you mentioned, I think it was slide 25, you said you start your algorithm with X0 and you said, well, of course we can randomize it. So how would you do it in practice? No, randomization is fine, but what would be the gain of computationability? And the second question you mentioned one slide later, but you said, well, we now have this linear program internally because we have to have a dual program. And then he said, well, we might try also, we might perhaps get convexity. Can you go a bit more in detail about the possibility of going to convex optimization?
Yeah.
And indeed, what would, perhaps more importantly, in the world of resilience, what would that open up for other applications?
Yeah, thank you. So first question is, if I understand correctly, how can we set the a fortification that is not zero, right? Yeah. So the thing is that even with the paper we publish, we try different approaches. The thing is that, at least the experience I have so far, is that there is not really clearly superior strategy to decide what is the best fortification. And usually after the first iteration, you already move to something that is decent. What is the problem here? The problem is that, let me see how I can explain. So every time we fix a different fortification, okay, it's like having a cut that is separating the attacks that are, let's say, bad. So the performance after that will be below the pi, and the attacks that are good. And then we can find the worst case attack, right? Mm-hmm. Then when we go to the next iteration, we have a different X. So we may actually enable, we may make feasible attacks that were infeasible with the previous fortification. So this is something interesting because it means that we cannot guarantee that all attacks that that were basically infeasible before will be infeasible later.
Yes.
So that's why it's quite challenging to find a strategy to get a starting point that is good. Because of course, yeah, it will be better for the convergence. We have already something quite close to the optimum, a few iterations, we are done. So we were trying a few ideas when we were working on that paper, but actually I could not find something that was completely superior compared to even starting with zero, right? And then the other thing is that it may be domain dependent. So it may depend on the kind of problem we are solving. In other words, the idea was, okay, at least we give you a baseline. Then if you have some knowledge that you can input, like you know already that this kind of strategy for the experience of the user or the defender is good, is a good starting point, then you can input that. Okay. But in terms of a general strategy that can apply to any kind of application for having a better starting point, so far I have not yet found something convincing enough, at least.
Okay.
Yeah, so for the second point, I mentioned convexity. Basically, what we want is to guarantee the duality, right? So we want to have some way to simplify this thing. Yes. Now, with linear programming is easy because, you know, we have the strong weak duality. Both of them are there and fine. Of course, when we start to go to integer, unless the problem is maybe total unimodular, we can relax and then we can transform it to LP, then maybe fine, but in general it's not true. So that's why here we cannot apply it anymore. The idea we were thinking about was actually, okay, is there any other kind of problem where maybe it's not linear, maybe convex, so we can still use some kind of duality to derive something similar to this, but that is something we have not yet explored. It's just that, of course, the benefit will be that we can manage a larger set of problems, right? Because when we have the linear assumption, we may lose a lot. We may not be able to capture many of the real world situation. So yeah, if we can do something with convexity, I think it will definitely benefit in terms of applicability. On the other hand, I'm not so sure about the complexity, like computational complexity of the algorithm, because I guess this may be affected as well.
Okay.
So it's definitely a good suggestion. It's something that we want to look into, but for now we have not yet studied that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Excellent talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
So any further question? There's some question in the chat, so I can read it aloud, Alberto. So, okay. Or Ingo said that, I'll read it. So how do you consider uncertainty to evaluate the payoffs? Since it's a winner takes it all situation, I understand that even low probability events carry high impacts. Then how does this impact the efforts of the defender?
Okay, let me see. Yeah, basically in this model, we are not taking into account probability. Like you can imagine the uncertainty set. Okay, let me go back here, right? So this guy here, right, the Z. So this is the uncertainty set. Anything in this set can happen. Now, if we have some kind of information about the probability, we may include that. For example, we may say, oh, look, we know the mean, we know something, we may go to some distributionally robust approach, something like that. However, in this case, we are looking at the rational attacker assumption. That means out of all the possible attacks, we know that the attacker will do the best he can. So it will perform the worst case attack for us. Now, is this unlikely? Sometimes, maybe, like one of the classical argument against robust optimization is that it is too conservative. But we are applying this kind of model to situations where it makes sense to use this approach. As I mentioned, it can be two situations. Number one, we know that the attacker is rational. You can think about, for example, terrorist attack, maybe, or something where there is a precise objective to maximize the amount of damage. Or the other one is when the system is critical. So even though something low probability may happen, and this is the worst case disruption, okay, the consequences of that are so bad that we want to avoid that at any cost. Now, this would introduce more discussion on, policy makers and what is the pros versus the cons. Do we want to accept the risk of dealing with an event like that, knowing that it's so low probability, but knowing also that if it happens, then the consequences are really bad, like if there is an accident at a nuclear power plant. So this is something that, it depends. In this framework, we are just looking at the worst case attack. As I said, if we have additional information on the distribution of these attacks, then we can incorporate, there can be extension of this work. As I said, maybe you can go for some kind of distributionally robust approach. It may be possible. But currently, yeah, we are basically saying that every attack is basically equally likely, and the attacker, we just pick the one maximizing the damage, so minimizing the performance after attack. So that's the assumption we have. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying it's the best for every situation. But I think, again, that it is really dependent on the kind of problem you are dealing with. So I don't know if this answer to the question. Okay, let me see. Okay.
So there's another question in the chat. Why are bisections a con? Is it because your fortification decisions are operational on solving time is a criteria?
Okay. The thing is not really about the solving time. Let me put it this way. First, is not really elegant, I have to say. So it's more like maybe some, I don't know how to say, just my feeling that a scheme like that, where you need to do bisection, if you can avoid, is not really elegant. The second one is actually somehow related to the time, but for this I will need to give some more details. So I mentioned that I also have in the paper I'm working on a version where you don't have bisection. So basically, the idea is that you're looking at the budget of the enemy, right? So this information, how to set the budget of the enemy, can be a byproduct of this problem. When you solve the fortification problem, right, you have already an idea about the maximum budget that you can let enemy pay. So you know that you cannot go above there, because every time you put a new attack, this problem is a maximization. So the optimal solution cannot become larger. Meaning to say, this will help you every time you solve this, you can decrease the upper bound instead of doing this kind of bisection. I don't know if it's clear. It's a little confusing without looking at the code, but the idea is that there is a way to not use bisection, and is slightly faster. Okay, you can think, if you are familiar with integer programming, this kind of bisection is similar to the branch and bound idea. Okay, so you are basically splitting and you keep doing that. This other one without bisection is similar to having cuts. Okay, you keep adding cut on the value of gamma. So one of the future research direction was actually combining both of them, similar to the branch and cut. So you do branching, you cut, and when the cuts are not deep enough, then you do branching again. So kind of combining these two ideas. But there is nothing wrong with the bisection. It's just that I find it an additional step that can be actually avoided, because the information about how to update gamma can come from the solution of this problem here. It's already a byproduct of that somehow. And you can get some gain in time. It's not a dramatic change. It's slightly faster, but again, is something to explore. It's nothing wrong. It's just a different way to look at the problem. And yeah, just the experiment we did, it seems that the no bisection is slightly faster. But when I mentioned that the bisection here is a cons, it was more from the elegance point of view, let's say. Yeah, so that's the answer. Okay.
And I'm wondering myself what kind of then actual situation could be concerned by this kind of algorithm. I can imagine maybe cyber risk is an environment where this sort of method of reacting could be useful.
Yeah, I tell you something that we are using as a case study for this paper. So basically, we are considering a problem of electricity transmission in China. So where, for example, you have different cities, you have different lines connecting cities. So it's still based on a network, and some of the lines may be disrupted. So the idea, again, is in a way is not too far from the application we had here, right? Is some kind of system, in this case, electricity, can be transportation, anything. I think the main point is to identify the scenario, like who is the attacker, right? The three things to identify are, okay, how can we fortify the network? Who is the attacker and which kind of attacks it can perform? And then the inner problem, what we are trying to achieve, like the performance. So yeah, it can be cyber attacks. Yes, it can be. It can be a computer network where maybe some of the connection between different nodes can be important. I can imagine, for example, I'm just thinking like, I didn't think about that before, but imagine, for example, something like the network between the banks, where communication between them is important. Let's say that you disrupt some of the links. What are the consequences of that? How can you fortify that? So in terms of application, I think it's really quite a general framework. The only cons I see that can limit the applicability, and I want to come back to the first question that was raised, is actually the fact that the inner problem must be linear. And when you look at some real-world application, they are everything but linear. But maybe this approach can be also extended if we combine with some black box optimization, who knows? For now, we are just exposing the general principle of the framework. So what is the idea we want to achieve? That is, we are looking at resilience from the point of view of the amount of attacks that we can stop, in a way. It's not just the consequence of the attack, but is the relationship, if you want, between the budget we have as defender, the performance we want to guarantee, and how many attacks the attacker can perform, right? So with this framework, you can deal with these three. You fix one, and you can see the relationship between the others. Application may be also, I don't know, I can think about maybe army, maybe security in that sense, maybe even border control. When you have to decide where to place some surveillance patrol, and then you have only limited amount of them, and then you have different places where you can put them, right? And you want to catch people that try to enter. This can be another example.
Yeah, I think. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thanks, Ingo, for the note in the chat. I just say it out loud because in the recording we can't see the chat. So Ingo suggests that for complex problems, one could look into multi-objective robust optimization.
That's another possible extension, definitely. Yeah. Again, the idea of this framework was to present the general principle. Then yes, it can be, you have different research directions starting from there. It can be looking to the, instead of linearity, convexity, can be the multi-objective. It can be, instead of worst case scenario, do some kind of distributionally robust. I think there are many ways to do that. And also, if you want to go more into the algorithm efficiency, as I say, try to combine the bisection, we know bisection, in a kind of branch and cut fashion. I think there are many things that can be done starting from this framework. But thank you for the suggestion.
So we've got a bit of time for a couple more questions, if there's any. So just really feel free to ask anything. And if not, then I guess we can close the session. There's still time for a very, very last minute question, but I don't see anything in the chat. Okay, so let's close the session. Thanks a lot, Alberto. That was very, very interesting. I will publish the recording of this on the Risk Center website, so it can be reviewed later. I hope you don't hear my baby crying in the background. I'm sorry about that. So good evening or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are, and see you in the next seminar. There's another resilience seminar in May. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Alberto.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.